When most people think of Maine's coast, they picture iconic lighthouses, lobster boats, and popular destinations like Portland or Bar Harbor. But Maine's coastline is much more than a few postcard views. Stretching more than 3,400 miles when you include its bays, islands, and inlets, Maine has one of the longest coastlines in the country. Along the way, the landscape changes dramatically, from wide sandy beaches near the New Hampshire border, to rocky peninsulas and working waterfronts in mid-coast Maine, to the rugged cliffs and remote forests of Downeast. For this video, we're traveling that coastline, stopping in 4 communities that don't always make the travel brochures, but each tell a different story about what it means to live on Maine's coast. From southern Maine all the way to the Canadian border, these are 4 hidden gems that prove there's no single version of coastal Maine. Our first stop is Wells, one of Maine's oldest communities. Originally settled in the 1640s, Wells began as a farming and fishing community long before beach tourism became part of its identity. Today, roughly 12,300 people call Wells home year-round. Covering more than 52 square miles, it's one of the larger communities along Maine's southern coast. And while its population grows significantly during the summer, there's much more to Wells than just a seasonal beach destination. At first glance, Wells feels like what many people picture when they think of southern Maine. Wide sandy beaches, seafood shacks, and a busy stretch of Route 1 filled with local businesses and visitors enjoying the coast. But spend a little time here and you'll discover a completely different side of the town. Just a few minutes from the beach is the Carson National Wildlife Refuge, established in 1966 to protect the salt marshes, estuaries, and coastal habitats that support migratory birds and countless other species. Rather than being one continuous park, the refuge protects 11 separate sections of coastline stretching from Kittery to Cape Elizabeth, preserving some of southern Maine's most valuable coastal ecosystems. Standing here, it's easy to forget you're just minutes from one of the busiest tourism corridors in the state. Just down the road is another place helping protect Maine's coastline, the Wells Reserve at Laudholm. As one of only 30 national estuarine research reserves in the United States, the reserve protects more than 2,200 acres of forests, fields, freshwater wetlands, salt marshes, and beaches, while supporting scientific research, education, and public recreation. Of course, no visit to Wells would be complete without spending time on the water. Drake's Island Beach is often appreciated for its quieter atmosphere compared to some of southern Maine's more heavily visited beaches. Whether you're walking the shoreline, watching shorebirds, or simply enjoying the view, Wells offers more than many visitors expect. That balance between recreation and a working waterfront is easy to see at Wells Harbor. Visitors come here to launch kayaks, fish, or enjoy the scenery, while commercial fishermen continue heading out each day, maintaining a connection to the industries that have shaped Maine's coast for generations. And when you're done for the day, this is where I'd go. Fisherman's Catch. Family owned, been here forever. Get the lobster roll, get the chowder, and enjoy great food with a phenomenal view. As we head north, the coastline begins to change. The long sandy beaches of southern Maine gradually give way to rocky shores, winding tidal rivers, and quiet peninsulas. Of course, I don't just talk about Maine, I help people move here too. I'm Kyle Dennis, host of Meeting Maine and a real estate agent with Pouliot Real Estate. Maine has so much to offer: historic towns, lakes, mountains, and communities full of character. If you've been dreaming about moving, I can help make it real, guiding you through neighborhoods, homes, and all the details that matter. Let's find your place in Maine. Our next stop is Georgetown, where we'll start to see a completely different side of Maine's coast. Home to just over 1,000 year-round residents, Georgetown covers about 19 square miles and occupies the southern end of Aroostook Island, where the Kennebec River, Sheepscot River, and Atlantic Ocean all come together. Unlike many towns, Georgetown isn't built around a traditional downtown. Instead, its neighborhoods, harbors, and villages are spread throughout the peninsula, making the journey itself part of the experience. One of Georgetown's biggest draws is Reid State Park, Maine's first state-owned saltwater beach. Opened to the public in 1946 after being donated by Walter East Reid, the park protects approximately 770 acres of beaches, sand dunes, granite ledges, tidal lagoons, and salt marshes. What makes Reid so unique is the variety of landscapes packed into one place. Long stretches of sand meet rocky headlands, while tidal pools and marshes support a wide variety of wildlife. It's also one of the first places on our journey where you really begin to see the transition from southern Maine's broad beaches to the rugged coastline that defines much of mid-coast and Downeast Maine. Georgetown isn't just known for its scenery. For more than 50 years, Georgetown Pottery has been producing handcrafted stoneware inspired by Maine's coast. Their signature blue spongeware has become recognizable well beyond the state, and the pottery continues to be handcrafted right here in Georgetown. It's another reminder that Maine's coastline doesn't just inspire outdoor recreation, it also inspires artists, makers, and small businesses that have become an important part of the community. We're here in Georgetown at the Eros Oyster Farm, where you can come pick your own oysters, and they give great farm tours here. That's why we're here this morning. I have a feeling I'm about to learn a lot more about oysters than I ever thought I would, and I skipped breakfast this morning, so I'm really excited to get to the eating part of the tour, which comes a little later.
When we started 10 years ago, it was our first decision as a family business, picking a name. And it took us a while. We came up with Eros. It's Greek. Does anybody know who Eros was?
He was the god of love.
Not just love, the god of erotic love.
Oh.
I gave you the trigger warning. I gave you the warning. Yeah, and by the way, he's the Greek version of the Roman Cupid. But the Roman version is this pudgy little baby with a little bow and arrow. The Greek version is the strapping, young, ripped young man, also an archer, but that's why we picked it, because he's an archer. Eros is a homonym for arrows. This is Robin Hood Cove. But you know, what we found out later, and this would have cinched the deal, but we didn't even know it when we picked the name. I later found out that the Native American name for this island, before the British renamed it Georgetown, the Wabanaki name is Eros Cahagan. Translated into English, it means good place for oyster farm. Can you believe that? No. You shouldn't. Fake news, fake news. But it does mean good place for spearfishing. So what the Wabanaki knew for 1,000 years, this cove was special. Some of you may be familiar with how it works in the atmosphere, where you have a cold air mass and a warm air mass. And when they collide, the cold air mass, being heavier and dense, sinks and lifts up the warm air mass, and you get turbulence, thunderstorms. We get underwater thunderstorms twice a day in Robin Hood Cove when this cold water hits the warm water from the preceding tidal cycle and it churns. All oyster farms rely on phytoplankton as their primary diet. To have an oyster farm work, you have to be in an area where the salinity is right, not too salt, not too fresh. You have to be near a food source, a saltwater marsh where the phytoplankton grows. There has to be some horizontal movement to carry the food to the oyster. The water temperature has to be within a certain range, so there are Goldilocks spots. This happens to be one of them. But the reason why our oysters seem to do so well, and other oysters that grow in this cove, is because of that underwater thunderstorm. The bottom of this cove is mucky, not because it's mud. It's decayed organic material from all the marine critters who have lived and died, and their remains sink down. And they don't get scoured clean, they just accumulate. And that's why it's so difficult to walk. So what happens when these thunderstorms occur underwater, it stirs up this detritus, and lifts it up into the vertical water column where our oysters are sitting for the oysters to eat. And it makes them sweet.
If you're planning to spend more time in Georgetown, there are plenty of other places worth checking out. Take a drive to 5 Islands, where lobster boats fill the harbor and you'll find beautiful views across Sheepscot Bay. Explore the peninsula's quiet back roads, stop at one of the local wharves, or simply enjoy the slower pace that defines so much of Mid-Coast Maine. As we continue farther north, the coastline changes once again. The peninsulas begin giving way to islands, and the working waterfront becomes even more central to daily life. Our next stop is Stonington, one of Maine's busiest lobster fishing communities. Stonington has just over 1,000 year-round residents and covers about 10 square miles on the southern end of Deer Isle. It sits within a network of islands, coves, and channels that have shaped life here for generations. But more than anything, Stonington is defined by its harbor. Crockett Cove Woods Preserve is a roughly 100-acre protected area managed by the National Conservancy on the Deer Isle shoreline. At Burnt Cove Boil, seafood is the focus, prepared in a simple, traditional Maine style and served right by the harbor. Just offshore, Isle of Haut sits as part of Acadia National Park, with a passenger ferry departing directly from Stonington Harbor. It's one of the few places where a working lobster port also serves as a direct gateway into a remote unit of the national park system. If you move beyond Stonington's harbor, Deer Isle quickly becomes a network of narrow roads and coastal pockets. The main route crosses the island, but much of what defines it sits off that road. Small coves, wooded shoreline, and scattered studios and galleries built into existing homes and working spaces. The Deer Isle Bridge marks the entry point onto the island, but once you're across it, the structure of the coast changes. Instead of continuous town or beachfront, you move through isolated stretches of forest and water in between small, independent communities. Leaving Stonington, the coast begins to feel even more remote. The islands thin out, the roads grow quieter, and the sense of industry gives way to something more rugged and isolated. Our final stop takes us to Cutler, one of the easternmost coastal communities in Maine, and one of the closest points to the Canadian border. First incorporated in 1789, it's one of the least populated towns along the coast, with just under 500 year-round residents spread across a large stretch of shoreline and forested interior. For much of its history, Cutler was shaped by fishing and small coastal trade along this exposed stretch of Atlantic coastline. Today, much of that land is defined less by development and more by preservation and access to the shoreline. Here, the coast stops feeling like a series of towns. It becomes a continuous edge of forest, rock, and open water. Just outside of town is the Cutler Coast Public Reserved Land, a state-managed preserve covering more than 12,000 acres of protected forest, wetland, and coastline. It's part of Maine's public reserved land system, set aside specifically for low-impact recreation and conservation, meaning there is no development, no roads, and no infrastructure within the core trail system. The landscape shifts continuously along the trail network. Sections move through dense spruce and fir forests, across peat bogs and wooden boardwalks, and then out toward exposed coastal headlands along the Atlantic. Within the preserve, the Bold Coast Trail system follows the most exposed section of shoreline. This is where the terrain opens up. Narrow forest paths give way to cliff edges overlooking the ocean, with long views across the Bay of Fundy and toward Grand Manan Island. The coastline here rises directly from the water in steep sections of granite and vegetation, with very little separation between forest and open ocean. Cutler is also home to Bold Coast Charter Company, which operates boat trips along this same stretch of coastline. Instead of hiking the cliffs, this is the water level perspective, moving along the base of the same headlands seen from the trail system above.
My late husband started Bold Coast Charter Company. It started as just a boat tour. Puffins weren't They were out there, and that was one of the things that we offered. But it became pretty obvious after a year or two that that's what people wanted. They wanted to go out to Machias Seal Island and see puffins. That became the focus, really, and it turned into an everyday from late May to mid-August adventure. Of course, there's other seabirds out there. There's razorbills and murres and terns. The last few years, there's been some gannets. They're not nesting. They're just kind of hopefully getting ready to at some point. Then, of course, there's seals. But then when we come back in, there is an island at the mouth of the harbor, a little river island, and there's a lighthouse. You get to see that on the way in. Introducing people to the nature of the area, and especially the birds, where it is a protected seabird colony and it's limited the number of people who can go out there. I think it really opens people's eyes to see, oh wait, this nature stuff is important. we need all these things in the ecosystem to function. Here in Cutler, the majority of people are fishermen, lobster fishermen specifically. In the winter, there's some scallop fishing, and there's a few fishermen that go after fish for pogies and herring. And there's some brief season in the spring for halibut. If you're visiting the area and you were lucky enough to get a reservation on the boat, of course, that's the first thing you should do. Maybe seeing a sunrise. I mean, anyone can see a sunset. Sunrise is a little bit special, especially here where it comes up so early. Doing the local trails. There's a number of trails. Bold Coast Trail is the popular one, the one that gets the most press, I think. But it is a little bit longer and more strenuous than, say, our Eastern Double Trail that's right here in the harbor, or Western Head, which is right here in Cutler. And of course, you know, Cutler's pretty special to me, but there's lots of places to visit in Lubec. And they have a store and restaurants and gas stations and a nice coffee shop, so.
And while we're this far east, it only makes sense to get a snapshot of what is a little further. From Cutler, the coastline continues into the far eastern edge of Downeast, Maine, where forest, shoreline, and scattered settlements thin out even further along the outer edge of the state. This stretch sits within the broader Quoddy region, an area around Passamaquoddy Bay and the surrounding channels, shaped by open Atlantic exposure and some of the largest tidal ranges on the East Coast. As you continue east, the road network begins to thin, and the landscape gradually transitions toward the final stretch of the United States mainland. At the edge is Lubec, the easternmost incorporated town in the country, positioned directly across a narrow channel from Canada, separated by the waters of Head Harbor Passage. From the salt marshes of Wells to the peninsulas of Georgetown, the working harbor of Stonington, and the cliffs and forests of Cutler, this stretch of Maine is less a single coastline than it is a series of different geographies stitched together along one edge of the state. At each stop, the relationship to the water shifts. In some places, it's beaches and wetlands, while in others, it's harbors built around industry. Farther east, it becomes forested coastline and exposed rock, where there are fewer roads and fewer defined centers of town. And by the time you reach the far eastern edge of the state, what stands out most isn't any single place, but how much the coast changes along the way. And don't forget to subscribe for more Meeting Maine.